I hope you're enjoying my YouTube channel, Rick Surowicz Watercolor, where there's a wide variety of videos available. If you haven't already, be sure to sign up for my mailing list to get the latest information about my videos, online courses, workshops, coupons, and giveaways. You can find the link in the top right corner, or you can find it in the description of this video. Now let's begin the narrated step-by-step tutorial for my painting, Simple Farmhouse. The photograph on the right was a reference for this painting. You don't always have to make your interpretation a realistic rendering of your subject. With this painting, I chose to simplify it and focus on shape, value, and use of line. This is the sketch I did with a B pencil on a quarter sheet of 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. It's 11 inches by 15 inches. I drew it much darker than I normally would so that I could photograph the image and provide it as a downloadable template. Before I begin to paint, I'll take what's called a dry cleaning pad and I'll rub it over the sketch to remove some of the excess graphite, and I'll have a lighter image, as you can see here, to work with on my painting. I'm going to begin by putting a light, fairly nondescript sky wash. And to do that, I'm going to turn my board upside down because I want to start with a light wash that has a little bit of a pinkish tone to it. To do this, I'm using quinacridone and coral, but there's a number of colors you could use to achieve this. And I want to gradate this into cerulean blue. So I'm taking a 1-inch flat brush and I'm cutting this wash around the shape of the structure here and taking it all the way down to where the horizon line would be and adding some clear water. And then I'm going to take a mixture that has some cerulean blue in it, and I'm just going to gradate that down to the edge of my paper. So I'm not trying to put clouds in, I'm not trying to have a larger is a contrast in the sky. I'm just going to have this nice gradated wash that starts out with kind of a warm pinkish tone and goes into a cerulean blue. Now my paper is saturated, and I'm going to take a little bit of raw sienna and I'm going to put that into the wash, and I'm going to introduce it right around the edge of the house so that it will flow down. And I want this just to give the feeling of some of the trees that are around behind this house, and it just gives just a little bit of a warm tone that it, as I develop this painting, it's just going to give more of a suggestion of some kind of distant trees there. Here I've turned my board right side up, and I'm going to put a wash again, cutting around the shape of this farmhouse. And I'm just wetting the paper, even though I have a little bit of pigment in there. I'm just trying to wet the paper because now I'm going to work wet and wet. So I'm putting down this clear water in a number of places behind the farmhouse, and I'm also going to put some in front of the farmhouse because there's some trees in the back and there's some trees that are in the front, and if I don't put those in early, I won't be able to come back and give the suggestion of those soft shaped trees that are in front of the house. So I put down water. I'm doing this with a 1-inch wash brush. And because I have just a little bit of pigment in there, you can kind of see where the wash is going. Next, I'm going to take a mixture which is mostly raw umber, and I'm going to have some that has just a little bit of a royal blue in it also, but for the most part it's raw umber, and I'm putting some of that color into the wash that I put down, and it's going around the house because the paper is dry around the edge of the house because I put that wash on the other side of it, so the paint's going to stay and flow in the area where the paper is saturated. I'm using a round wash brush, and I'm introducing more paint into the wet area of the paper, and my brush is saturated with paint just as the paper is saturated with water. So because I'm using a saturated brush on saturated paper, that paint is really going to flow, but it's going to stop where the paper is dry. So you can see that that paint doesn't run down the page, and my board is at about a 15 to 20 degree angle. That's how I normally paint. And now I'm putting some of that mixture on top of the house and at the side, because there's trees that are in front of the house overlapping it, and there's trees that go to the side and behind the structure here. Now I'm going to bring some of that mixture to the side and more into the foreground here, because there's a line of straw and saplings and weeds to the right there that move towards the foreground, and then they come across the front yard of this farmhouse. And I'm taking a plastic scraper and just giving the suggestion that there's some grassy shapes here, some weeds sticking up, could be straw, and just creates interesting texture. I was going to scratch some up there in this area, but it's too wet. But what I am doing is just dragging that around a little bit to make that edge a little more irregular and a more natural feeling. I want to add some more of that, those grassy shapes here in a couple different areas here to make it feel more like what's going on there, and that more in the middle to the foreground there. Once again, just taking a plastic scraper and creating some texture there to suggest the grass. So now I'm going to take a 1/2-inch flat brush, and I'm taking a mixture with some cerulean blue and raw sienna, and I'm going to put a wash on the shadowed sides of the structure. And some of my mixture is cool and some is leaning towards the warm side. So the mixture that's leaning to the warm side has more raw sienna in it, and the mixture that's leaning more towards the cool side has more cerulean blue in it. I'm going to take that here underneath the edge of that roof line and down the edge of that gutter, but that whole side of that house is really in shadow. And as I start to put that wash on, it's a little cooler, and the value is similar to some of what I have down, but it helps make on the right side, that side of the building where the light source is hitting, it makes it much brighter because I'm toning down the areas where I don't want to have the light to white tones. So my brush is saturated. It's loaded with the mixture from my palette. And when I make a brush stroke, that bead of water on the tip of my brush coats the paper. If you find yourself trying to put down a wash like this and you're getting dry paper showing through in texture, you don't have enough in your brush. You should load it up. Make sure you mix enough paint in your palette and load your brush up. And it's often when I'm painting, it's more the bead of water on my brush that's coating the paper, and not the bristles, not using it like I would when I'm painting a wall. So I've treated those areas as larger shapes. So I'm not painting individual boards or little irregularities in the side of the house or on those walls. I'm painting just large shapes. Now I'm painting in shadow the shape underneath the roof line there on the side of that pipe that comes up, stacked there a little bit more under the roof line. I've left a break to indicate where that gutter's at. Now I'm going to take that cool tone and I'm going to bring it up into the foreground here a little bit along some of these other grassy shapes that I put in, just to indicate some shadow and to tone this area down. I'm using my 1/2-inch brush, but I can really be using a bigger brush, so I'm going to switch to a 1-inch brush here, and I'm going to put down this wash. And you'll see when I paint with a brush like this, I often use different areas on the brush. Sometimes I'll use the tip, sometimes I'll use the corner, sometimes I'll turn it on its side. or sometimes I'll use it just brushing like you would think about a normal paintbrush, but I try to get the most out of the brush. So what's happening here is there's shadows being cast across this lawn from all those trees on the side. I'm just giving a suggestion of those. I might come back and make that a little darker later. So I put a wash down to give the indication of the mass of the trees here. When the leaves have fallen, you see these more as kind of a soft, large, soft shape and less hard objects. So I put that wash in to give the suggestion of the branches and the thickness of the trees. And now I'm going to put some trunks and some branches in just to give some structure to it. I took a rigger brush and put some water down first, and now I'm taking that brush loaded with pigment and dropping it in the area that I had put some water. It just creates some variation and interesting shifting of values within the area that was painted with a brush with water. I'm going to give an indication of some trees behind the house here, just some trunks and some branches, and you want to make sure you take those to the edge of the house so they don't look like they're just floating. Next, I'm going to take my rigger brush. I'm going to give the indication of a few of these trees that are in front of the house. So I'm just using my rigger brush with a mid-value mixture that has some royal blue, a little raw umber in it, and quite a bit of water. So it's not a real dark valued mixture. I'm going to put some touches of stronger color in it, just touching it with my brush and then letting it flow through that shape that is wet from the first stroke of the brush. There's some saplings and some bushes, large briar or bushes here along this line, so I'm going to give an indication of those, just making some arbitrary brush strokes, and I'm going to carry that over to the left in my composition. Once again, there's some small trees there, and there's some trees that are off to the side. Now I'm going to take a mixture with some cerulean blue and some raw sienna, and for the darker valued mixtures I'll add a little bit of royal blue to this, but I'm going to take my quill brush here, which has a nice point. I'm going to start to do some of the detail work on the farmhouse itself. So I'm giving an indication of some windows here, and these aren't real tightly rendered by any means. I'm still working with shape and line. You can see along the roof line here where I'm just making some brush strokes here just to give an indication of the edge, and I let that break in different areas, so it's a lost and found edge, and there's some breaks in the line that I'm using to describe the edge of some of those shapes. And here I'm coming in painting some of these windows, and then I'll use some line also just to give the indication of the molding around the window. And I don't paint these in completely. I don't just paint a bunch of solid squares for the windows. I break those shapes up a little bit and leave some light and dark areas to give the suggestion that there's some reflection going on. Now I'm going to move along and paint some of these shadowed areas under the eave of the roof there. And again, you can see how I interrupt that. I don't just outline things. I like to break it up. And now I'm just getting the top edge of that roof line. And I'll put a little bit there on the top, and then just to give indication of what's going on there. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to paint some more of these windows on this shadowed side of the structure. Once again, I'm not painting squares, and I'm using some line to help describe the molding, which is around the outer edge of the window, or it's part of the construction. Just going to paint a little bit more, and keep in mind that there's some trees and some foliage, there's some branches in front of this structure, so you're not going to see sharp edges throughout the whole thing. You're not going to see all of it because some of it is blocked by the tree that's in front, and you still want to keep the feeling that that's a soft shape, light valued shape that's in front of this. So I'll break that up in some places and I'll leave it incomplete in others. And here again, I'm using some line to describe the edge of that molding. I'm gonna put a dark line and just a little shape on this pipe that comes out of the rooftop there, and just give some stronger touches of value here and there. And I'm going to move over to the left side where I haven't done much, and I'm going to start to paint within that porch area and underneath the roof line over there. And this is a cooler mixture that I'm using, and I'm painting around that tree with a darker value so you can get the feeling of overlap and a little more depth in the composition. So I'm still using my quill brush. Again, it has a nice tip and it holds quite a bit of paint. Here I'm leaning it more towards the side of the brush. I'm going to take some clear water. I'm going to just gradate that down a little bit, and I often blot with my tissue. So I'm going to bring that darker value along the base of the house. There's some dark values in there. There's some stone, and then there's just some plant life that creates shadowed areas along the base of that farmhouse. And there's another window here. I want to give the indication of that, but I'm not going to have as much contrast in this area as I do in some of the other areas of the house. Now I'm going to bring that dark value underneath the roof line there and right to the edge of the house on the shadowed side of that peak wall. And I'm going to put a little darker value in some of these trees, just a little darker, a little hard edge, not a lot, just a few touches. Now I've added a little bit more royal blue to the mixture, so I've got slightly darker value. I'm just going to just put some touches in a few of these areas to give me a little bit more contrast. It's a little hard to see when I'm painting on a dark middle value, but it's a bit darker than the mixture which I've already applied in some of these areas. And I'm not going over everything I've done, just putting some touches of this darker value in a few spots. I'm going to bring some of that a little further over to the left, and I'll get in these windows and a little bit underneath the roof line to the left. You can see if you look to the left side of the structure to the area I'm working in now that there's a difference in the level of contrast between the light and the dark. I don't have the darkest darks on the left side of this building yet, but I'm going to put a few touches in there, but not quite as much as what I have elsewhere. And I'm going to get underneath this roof line a little bit more, and now I'm going to move over to the other side here, and I let the tree interrupt that, and there you can see a darker value, and I'm not going to put much more over there. What I am going to do is I'm going to put some touches of this value more on the ground underneath some of these areas where some of the plant life is. And bring that to the other side and a little bit more towards the foreground, but it's still back there. I'm going to take a spray bottle and just soften that a little bit and spray it up just to help reinforce the feeling of bushes and shrubs. Going to take a darker value here to the side that strengthens the edge there for that building, and again I'm going to soften that as I go up. Got a little bit of that spray up on that window and it softened that edge a little too much, so I'm going to blot that up. I'm going to take some of this now to the left side. So this would be to the side and to the back of this house, and it's a little bit of a darker value. And I'm going to soften that a little bit, but I'm also going to keep some of that hard edges, just give the feeling of like a pine tree that's over there. I'm going to take a cool mixture with some raw sienna, cerulean blue, and royal blue in it, and just put some of these other areas in a little bit more shadow. So I put underneath the roof line there on the one side. Now I'm bringing it here to the side that's closest to us, and I'm putting this wash on here, and I'm just kind of breaking it up a little bit here and there so there could be some light hitting it through a tree or something, but it gives a little bit more depth, a little more dimension to this, and makes it much more interesting, I think. So I'm using my 1/2-inch flat brush, and I can get a wide brush stroke with it, or I can turn it to its side and twist it and get a narrow brush stroke with it, just like that right there. So you can use it any number of ways. I'm going to bring some of that darker value down into the foreground. Not real dark, but it's a middle value, but it's a cool middle value. And I'm going to put a little bit more of that in the foreground. So I'm taking a light wash of that with a 1-inch flat brush, and I'm going to put a wash over most of that area. So the whole area in the foreground now is wet, and I want to get a little bit more of that mixture and bring it to the left side there and bring it forward. So you can see this is a very loose approach to painting this subject. And I'm going to put a white mat on this to frame it up a little bit. And there's my painting, Simple Farmhouse. You can see how it was a simplified approach, very loose approach to interpreting the subject. Be sure to check out my online learning center. You'll find the link to the right. And if you have questions, you can always email me at contact@surowicz@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.